Numerous reports indicate that manufacturing has emerged as the favorite target of ransomware groups and hackers. In response, a new report from Industrial Media discusses the evolution of industrial cybersecurity, its current state, and the tactics hackers are using, including phishing schemes, malware, and ransomware attacks. It also details solutions in arming manufacturers with the knowledge and resources needed to win more fights on this highly complex and ultra-competitive battlefield. Download the industrial sector's new battlefield by going to manufacturing.net/cyber. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Now, y'all know how much I love my stats, so let's jump into some recent data uncovered by Trustwave Spider Labs. Their research found that the average cost of a cyber attack at a manufacturing enterprise is averaging about $4.7 million. And that's before collateral damage like reputational injury or supply chain volatility is even taken into consideration. The company also offered depth on some familiar foes, finding that 30% of all ransomware attacks on manufacturers are being conducted by Lockbit, with those producing industrial equipment, construction equipment, automotive products, and electronics representing the most popular targets within the sector. In addition to reinforcing concerns over the growth of the attack surface that's being created by more connected devices, and a rise in hacktivist group attacks that plague unintended victims in the industrial sector, the research also offered an update on phishing attacks. According to the report, credential harvesting, malicious email attachments, and compromised websites are amongst the most popular tools used by hackers to infiltrate the systems of manufacturers. To discuss these findings and more, we welcome Kory Daniels, CISO of Trustwave, a leading provider of industrial cyber risk solutions, to the show. So, hey, Kory, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to Security Breach. You know, we were talking in the intro about some of the recent research that Trustwave put out there, and it really seems to go back to these big three types of attacks that we're seeing throughout the industrial sector. Two of them we've been talking about for a while. The third one's getting a lot more attention right now. So in introducing yourself and Trustwave a little bit, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on ransomware and phishing schemes, some of the things you're seeing there in terms of trends or new developments.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And, it's a pleasure to join you in this community. Some background that, goes into the credibility of this report is, Trustwave runs a security research arm, and we're a global managed security SOC cyber defense service, along with our advisory and penetration testing capability, which we utilize the insights from both our offensive capabilities as well as our more reactive defensive capabilities to glean the intelligence from not just our customer base, but proactively in what we're observing in the industry and the dark web and the intelligence that we have from threat actors. Yeah. My role in the organization as Global Chief Information Security Officer is I have the ultimate accountability to ensure we sustain, not just the cyber defense posture, but the resiliency and compliance of our business. And to the threats that you just highlighted, when we look at malware and ransomware in the business, when we look at phishing and how's it evolved and how it hasn't evolved, and credential and just data leakage of the business, overall, each one of these threat types, they're not necessarily new. And what's been interesting to observe is as the industrial industry and manufacturing industry has become more digitized, is we've seen traditional tactics and techniques and procedures that are used by these, several different types of threat actors, both from, very destructive and nation state oriented versus the more financially motivated, threat actor groups that are looking to achieve financial gain. But we've seen ransomware and these threat groups really turn their eye and attention to the industrial sector and manufacturing as kind of new territory, and it's new territory for threat actors to exploit, and it's been new territory from our interactions and from our observations with the community, for business themselves, and how we look at manufacturing sites that have typically been air gapped, entirely segmented off from the corporate network, and how these entities have become more and more connected with the corporate environment as we've seen them become more digital. When we look at ransomware and ransomware targeting industrial manufacturing organizations, it's been particularly precarious for not just the, I'll call it, external brand implications in terms of, God, like, geez, our organization's been hit by ransomware. What does that mean to our organizational brand, especially in digital trust? Of how, does this implicate our positioning with our partners, with our contracts, with our customers? But the really precarious part that we've seen in manufacturing, in industrial, is just what's the human implication? Yeah. And both for the individuals that are most closely related. So when we talk about the manufacturing of good, or if there's smelting involved, like what are the systems involved in the manufacturing process? And the exposure of, like, if something gets brought down inside that environment, is there human risk now as part of the equation? And if not from our direct employees, then as we look at our consumers and our customers, right, is it a vulnerability exploited specifically to us, or is it vulnerability exploited of our products? And it's been, I haven't seen that human element of risk really brought into the equation like we observed and started to see talked about in this circle, that I think is really special to this industry and this sector.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. The human element is becoming something that we're talking a little bit more about, or at least recognizing. But in terms of solutions, we're definitely lacking there. I think you're absolutely right in terms of the industrial sector becoming such a bigger target. And we've gotten better in a lot of ways, but there's still some of the little stuff that we're missing. And I think that's leading to some of these attacks still being so prominent, or some of these tactics by the hackers still being so prominent, including phishing schemes. Because really the phishing scheme, it's a social engineering dynamic. It's very simple. It's really not a complicated approach, but we're still seeing it being very successful. Are there other things that you're seeing out there right now in terms of, are these attacks being elevated or evolving in some way, or has there been any positive movement from some of your customers in terms of responding to them or defending against them?
I'll try to tackle that in two components, in terms of what we're observing from kind of taking what was old and giving it some new polish for what we're seeing and what we believe we'll continue to see going forward, in how threat actors have evolved phishing, leveraging new technology, enhancing the people and process in a very similar way that in the way we run our businesses, look to leverage technology to enhance our people and process. And so we've seen already, last year we saw, AI has been around for some time, but we saw a big splash last year with generative AI, and a knee-jerk reaction of both from technical audience to non-technical audience to the board to the operators, about what are the implications of generative AI in how we use it for our internal operating model. How do we use it or not use it in our products? And this is another dimension of how are threat actors using it to increase the sophistication and lowering the barrier of entry for what was already a very, when you look at cost and opportunity, not very expensive type of attack to launch, with huge opportunity and financial, ceiling. And generative AI has just allowed, threat actors to really challenge security awareness and education programs, especially for a non-technical audience. And we're seeing that increase in consistency of how we're seeing organizations be challenged with more sophisticated types of, it's no longer your email, your CEO just asking you to go out and buy a bunch of gift cards. It's leveraging organizational intelligence. It's leveraging your LinkedIn. It's leveraging your X account. It's leveraging your social media presence and what we put out there, and using and harvesting that intelligence to write more sophisticated, tailored styles of attacks that we used to call spear phishing for an executive typically. Yeah. But it's almost like spear phishing has now been commoditized. It's become easier to spear phish any individual in the organization. So that's really prompted organizations to think about how we educate our users and our partners and our supply chain around their role and responsibility of being vigilant against phishing in our environment. But it's also raised questions about, well, are we testing this enough? Like we do a lot of education, but how often are we actually prompting and challenging our business to not to embarrass anyone, but really testing the vigilance and resiliency of our ability to withstand this high frequency and continues to be one of the most successful types of attacks in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about phishing, and you're right, it's such a simple approach and it hasn't evolved that much other than the use of AI. But what we're seeing it really coming into play, and usually this is sort of part of the whole phishing scheme conversation, but credential harvesting is becoming so much more prominent right now. It goes all the way back to Colonial Pipeline, which really put industrial cybersecurity on the map. But then we've seen it even as recently as the big Boeing hack that just took place. It's simple logins, it's admin accounts. We saw a big PLC hack that was just because of default passwords. So this credential harvesting dynamic is becoming a bigger and bigger tactic by the bad guys. And it seems like the potential response or defense isn't that complex, but it's continuing to be overlooked. What are your thoughts there in terms of what this is a blocking and tackling? This feels like a low-hanging fruit that we're just not grabbing onto there. What could be some of the dynamics behind that?
Well, it's a great point. And we're seeing credential harvesting becoming more and more lucrative for threat actors out in the industry. And a big reason for it is it's a way for threat actors to reap financial gain without necessarily having a successful ransomware. And you look at, how do you maximize the financial opportunity in targeting, an organization or your business? Having someone pay a ransom is great. Extorting someone by denying availability of, through either DDoS or the ransomware itself is another opportunity. Well, if both of those fail, you can always rely on, well, if I'm able to exfiltrate and find data that other threat actors in my community find useful to set up their next attack, either that next attack against your business or next attack against your supply chain in your community. And that's something we're observing as some of the motivating behaviors in successful data harvesting and credential harvesting. And it's not just it's not just passwords anymore. It's about getting user and identity intelligence. Who are you doing business with? Who are those users? Who are your customers? And that's, there's a variety of motivations going on there. Everything from, I'll use examples of a nation state group looking to identify diplomats and diplomat behavior in certain parts of the industry to understanding, hey, how do organizations, what are the key supply parts, of this airplane or this bus or this car or this electric car, or, how can I get access to the CAD designs and look at what is the value of that to market, whether the organization knew I took it or not. So before I go too further, it's really become this I'll call it the threat actor opportunity, which is why we've seen this shift and increased the focus against the industrial manufacturing vertical, where there's just a lot of opportunity for gain and to generate successful outcomes other than just deploying ransomware.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that human element sort of creeps back into the conversation at this point in putting out the knowledge. I think everybody who's involved in the industrial enterprise wants to be part of this team and the overall success. We all know how badly a shutdown impacts everybody and everything that we're doing. And just more information internally about protecting your password. Don't write it on a Post-it note and stick it on your computer. Change the admin stuff, all of that. That conversation just it needs to be more prominent and repeated more often internally.
Well, and you raise, password and password security. And when I start thinking about password security, amongst other things, is how do we look at our corporate hygiene and our digital hygiene? And that's really, when we look at the fundamentals of, hey, how do we demonstrate, above and beyond compliance? So how do we define hygiene for our own business in terms of the minimum viable floor that we really need to demonstrate and continuously sustain to not unnecessarily generate unbeknownst risk or unnecessary risk, in the spirit of let's control what we can control. We can't always control if a highly sophisticated threat actor is going to target our business, but what we can control is our multi-factor hygiene, the way we do password management, the way we do asset management inside the business, the governance and ensuring we have healthy governance and healthy alignment. And that's not just the cyber team or IT team trying to do it all themselves. And so organizational hygiene and really defining what that means to your business, your executives, and your operating model, and your operations teams is becoming more and more important, above and beyond just can we demonstrate compliance, and identifying what is the bar for our business to establish, hey, here are a couple practices that we really need to implement and sustain to help ensure we maintain an acceptable level of resilience hygiene for our business to operate.
Well, that's a great point, especially because when we look at, continuing to go back to how the OT environment has become such a big target, that environment is different than IT. Remote monitoring and remote access is different than on the plant floor. And all of these different areas demand a different approach to this data hygiene. And again, getting the human element involved so that these folks understand we're not putting DFA in place just to alienate you and make it another step. It's got a real world application and reason for it. And I think in a lot of instances, because in IT, you just do it because this is what you had to do. In the operations side, where you've got individuals who are in charge of a lot of data and a lot of processes, just help them understand why you need that double factor authentication, why you may have a zero trust policy in place, whatever the case may be, so that they understand it and then they'll implement it and use it a lot more effectively and more frequently than trying to figure out workarounds, essentially.
No, and your point is spot on between, how important is partnership and trust in order to help navigate threat actors who are aggressively evolving and changing and unencumbered by bureaucracy to some level, with a very healthy alignment about getting financial opportunity and gain. And it's where I've seen, how do you get the wind behind your back as an organization in looking at navigating not just your organization's adoption of new technologies, generative AI, IoT based devices. And you look at the announcement between John Deere's partnership and leveraging Starlink, and what's historically, we'll never connect to have internet connected devices here, but we're seeing more like that digitized world is expanding the attack surface, and it's hard for the security and the resilience of the business, a function that has traditionally been taxed already by, how do we keep people and sustain kind of career paths and growth without losing the talent? How do we ensure we have the right skills at the right time, and partnership with the operating groups, the manufacturing sites? Like, no one understands these assets and these technologies better than them. And so security and corporate IT are so dependent on that healthy relationship and partnership, internal partnership, to ensure that they can work together about how to optimally, establish hygiene, knowing that the ring fence and kind of the security hygiene of what it was 2 years ago, a year ago, certainly 10 years ago, has changed.
And continues to do so. It is an interesting dynamic because we've got all this Industry 4.0 technology, and more manufacturers, especially during the pandemic, in a lot of ways because they had to, started to implement it and really embrace more automation. And now we come out of that pandemic, we said, well, hey guys, that's great, but now you've got all these connected devices. every one of them is a potential vulnerability and security risk. So we need to go back and make sure everything's good there, which is frustrating. Again, when you're talking about operations folks who want to put product out the door, but it's just that ongoing battle we have got to fight right now.
Well, and I can appreciate, we saw this, a bit when we saw digital transformation and adopting the cloud, where, the opportunity and, the business benefits, the speed and agility to reach to customers, to reach to partners, to enable the speed of our own developers and our own product teams. We see this kind of second coming of incorporating some of the lessons learned that we saw from adopting cloud to be a more digitally powered, cloud empowered business. And IoT, Internet of Technology devices, some of the more brownfield retrofitted, things that weren't purpose built, internet facing devices or internet connecting devices that have now been retrofitted to be internet connected devices, all in the spirit of being more competitive, all in the spirit of being more efficient, to allow to reap the business benefits. And I think that's that balance, and finding that opportunity and partnership and governance and sweet spot is, yes, reap the benefits, but ensure, do we know the risks? Have we done the threat modeling? Like, do we know, we've opened Pandora's box in adopting generative AI. Like, were we truly ready for what that meant for our business and our organization, by having things like zero trust and ensuring that people can only access what they should be able to access because what their role and responsibility says they should be able to access.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And there's a lot of things that you just said there that we could go into a lot of rabbit holes and go down. I mean, the secure by design dynamic is one that's very interesting right now in the industrial sector, but we'll save that one for right now. One of the big challenges we have in industrial cybersecurity, really cybersecurity as a whole, but we're talking on the industrial sector right now, is finding bodies, finding people to fill these roles. I mean, we've heard estimates, there's as many as 1 million of these jobs that are out there that are going to go unfulfilled over the next decade. So you just talked about using AI potentially as almost a recruitment tool, as a way to get people in the door and maybe more interested in this career path. Is that something that you're seeing companies potentially do right now? Is that something that's in the future? Or are there other tactics too that maybe we're not leveraging to identify and retain some of these cybersecurity folks internally?
I think it's still part of the early adopter discovery, but the use case, they're directionally correct in meaning there's light in a North Star in identifying there's an opportunity that, based off the maturity of the large language model, and the opportunity to, to go through and, experience lessons learned, or wait for someone else to go through the lessons learned and to share it with you. But we are absolutely looking at, how do we see generative AI provide, that ability to empower, bring a more senior individuals and level intelligence, that artisan member of the guild, the individual that is master of their trade craft and investigation and response, and find ways to take that intelligence of that individuals and start to disseminate that into playbooks and prompt engineering to allow individuals that may not have tooling and technical sophistication or coding sophistication, but start to execute playbooks that were directionally wired and structured based off much more, senior and veteran and I'll call it savvy analysts who have gone through, a threat investigation, who have gone through incident response. And it is providing an opportunity to receive some of those benefits. Now, how much of that is widespread and common use? I think that's the vision that we're scratching the surface on as an industry. We are scratching the surface at, but we've seen major tech players of AWS, Microsoft, Google, right? We recognize that they're putting a significant investment into this capability, so it's hard to not lean in a bit and look under the hood of the capabilities in the engine and start to formulate your own perspectives.
I think that's an interesting thought too as well, because we haven't really talked about that before. When it comes to cybersecurity in the industrial sector, we borrow way too much from IT, and it's just not a cut and paste. It doesn't work that way. And in a lot of other areas, especially on the operations side, when it's lean manufacturing, when it's just-in-time processes, and all those things, you're taking input from all the different players. When you're looking at integrating technology, we haven't done that with cybersecurity. There is a lot of insight throughout the organization, throughout the enterprise that should be utilized. And maybe that is where you find that individual who was ideally suited for that cybersecurity, especially on the OT side, in filling that role. So that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and I think that's been when we've looked at the opportunities of, the barrier of entry into cybersecurity, it's one of those of identifying of, hey, I'm going to build this fancy fusion center. And it's like, what the heck is that? Is it a SOC? Is it a NOC? Is it neither? Is it both? But this idea of bringing together historically very siloed operational units and really tapping into the intelligence and the experience that is very difficult to replicate other than someone coming out of that operational technology field for the last 10 years, taking a SOC analyst who's more of a generalist, but very good at investigation discipline. The idea would be, well, how do we scale and siphon that intelligence and make that intelligence more available to the defenders of our business, but do so without having to call that individual at 1 a.m. every time something goes wrong, whether it's, minor or severe. That context and intelligence is really important for the defenders of the business to help disseminate of, hey, do we have something really bad going on here? Or is this something that's a false positive, or it's a change that's gone wrong in the environment? But that's that dissemination of intelligence, and to your point, is really the speed of access to that intelligence is becoming more and more important based off the speed and sophistication of the threat actors, and having a very defined, repeatable, or precise playbook. They have a plan of attack. Sometimes they just kind of fumble in, but if someone is or if someone or some entity or group is targeting your business, like a football game or anything else, they have a defined playbook that they have created to target the organization, and that's what flips it back to your business of, are you matching that level of preparedness?
Yeah. Well, and we know that the hackers, they're very sophisticated. They're very collaborative as well, and have very well-defined roles internally in terms of who's doing what. Going back to your point, too, about calling the same person at 1 o'clock in the morning, I think right now we'd just be happy if we had at least 2 or 3 people we could call at 1 o'clock in the morning, so it's not always on one person and one perspective, if you will. Another big challenge right now, Kory, we've talked about this expanding attack surface, more connected devices, everything that entails. As these vulnerabilities are discovered, the providers of the software, the automation platforms, the components, whatever, have been very good about getting patches supplied out there. But we're in an operational environment. It's challenging to shut things down and install a lot of these patches, and that can take a lot of time just to get them updated and applied correctly and everything else. Just kind of looking at your perspective and working with clients, what you're seeing in the field, any best practices or observations, and how we can maybe improve the implementation of those patches.
Absolutely. And we see, and this is one that unfortunately can generate a lot of friction inside the business, unless you've all taken, you've had a party or you've taken each other out and had a good time. But this is where we typically have seen the trope of cats and dogs between the culture of security trying to drive. We have vulnerabilities. We're audited. We're subject to the compliance regulation. We go through maturity assessments. We're being hammered on. We got to remediate faster. We got to remediate more efficiently. As we look at vulnerability teams and engaging with information technology teams, operational technology teams about how important it is of, hey, we got a new vulnerability in the environment, and it's from released by a product, and we got to go patch it. The question raised of, well, you don't really understand how this technology works in our manufacturing environment. We go patch that and it goes down, like the plant's down. So thank you, security, for your advisement by that patch. We're just going to move on.
Yeah.
So the hygiene of kind of twofold. Of we're seeing organizations put more emphasis and attention of going, how can we naturalize this and reduce the friction? So inviting the governance and inviting more, increased frequency of the forum to look at the health of vulnerability discovery and patch management has become really an important instrument in driving, successful hygiene. And are we remediating against the times we want, or if we as a business make a decision not to deploy a patch because of the implications of that system, it's done as a business, and it's not left on the securities team's shoulder to go, hey, we're not getting support, and it's not being left on just the operational or IT asset owner saying, hey, no one understands this better than I do, I'm making that call, and none the wiser. It really becomes an organizational call, which is part of that wind at your back instead of wind in your face in establishing the hygiene. Now, the other challenge is these operational technology environments is how do we facilitate scanning and discovery? Like, how do we know what assets should or should not be there? And so asset management has always been a challenge in an organization in maintaining a healthy and high quality CMDB and a change management and asset database in their environment, to maintain an inventory, an accurate inventory, and what software is running on it.
Yeah.
And it's just been complicated. And so this is the other piece, is how, what do we need to do as a business to reduce the lack of illumination about how do we identify and do continuous monitoring of vulnerabilities and assets in these environments.
Closing up here, Kory, this has been awesome. Great. A lot of good information here. Just want to know if there's anything else we should know about Trustwave, and then also to get your thoughts on what you see as maybe some of the bigger trends down the line, maybe the next year and a half, as it relates specifically to industrial cybersecurity.
Yeah, what I'll share is, Trustwave as a global business, we see industrial trends, in Australia, in Europe, in the UK, in mainland Europe, in the US, and it gives us a unique perspective of not just the industrial vertical itself, but even geopolitical and some of the geo elements. So I would emphasize that we didn't talk too much about the geopolitical aspect of today, and what that can mean to the importance of you and your organization's positioning in the supply chain. And I would emphasize that, as part of reviewing the threats in your environment, reviewing getting clarity to the asset inventory, like getting the internal intelligence of the business is great, but I would really emphasize, understanding the way technology and people and process work in your organizational supply chain is becoming really, really important for security leaders and security personnel in partnering with the business, understanding not just third-party risk, but then fourth-party risk. And even that fourth-party risk could have fifth-party risk. And it's really a threat modeling exercise of what are all the different ways our supply chain can either get disrupted, or, to our earlier point on credential harvesting, is where's our potential points of failure, in who has access to our CAD designs, who has access to data that is both, what we consider sensitive, or data that, whether we consider it sensitive or not, the threat actor community finds it, valuable and fruitful and financially beneficial. So that's a key part of when you look at this threat modeling, understanding your attack surface of your industrial environment, both from a software and hardware perspective, the vulnerability hygiene around it and your policies and your governance, and then really looking at, well, then what is our new supply chain, digitally connected world of API to API, our API, partners API. How do we really have a good inventory of how all these things work? To your point, you can't defend what you don't know or don't understand. And that's what I'll share as part of, when we look at Trustwave's mission of what gets us out of bed every day, whether it's through how can we help, advise in best practices or test kind of what you got as is today, or providing the sustainment of, the operational SOC services through cyber defenders. All these things, culminate in helping us look at partnership with the industry that is as important internally as it is externally, because we face those issues too. As CISO of our organization is, while we're not in manufacturing, we do have a supply chain, and part of that supply chain is our customers. So it's really insightful to look at the health and discipline in facilitating threat modeling and attack path exercises and playbook and training to ensure that you can really be resilient and not just check the box on awareness and education and compliance.
Thanks, Kory. And for more information on Trustwave, you can check them out at trustwave.com. And thank you for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Kory Daniels, I'm Jeff Reinke, and this is Security Breach.